So welcome all to Intro to Agency Administrator. My name is Al Watson. I am a district ranger on the Sequoia National Forest. And to let you all know, this meeting will be recorded. We've actually started recording. The hope is for those that were not able to join us, that they can then view the recording at another time and be able to glean some information for new or agency administrators, as well as a refresher for those. So what we've got going on is this is particularly to those that have been unable to go to training such as M581. And so with a panel discussion, we're hoping to be able to give agency administrators some more information that they can use should they get a fire on their unit. So with that being said, the way that we're going to run this is we will have a couple of questions that the panel will be answering, and that any of the participants, if please use your question and answer chat box so that you can field questions to the panel. I'll be facilitating the discussion, and so as we go along and there's a question, I will then pose the question to one of the panel members. So with that being said, we will turn it over to the panel for introductions. So if you could start us off, Kevin.
I think you're on mute, Kevin.
You know I am. So good morning. I'm Kevin Elliott. I'm the Forest Supervisor for the Los Padres National Forest. 40 years Forest Service experience, 20 of those as a Forest Supervisor, 10 of them as an advanced agency administrator. And so I'll just stop with that.
All right, sounds good. So next up, can Sarah LaPlante, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure thing. So my name's Sarah LaPlante. I'm a district ranger on the Stanislaus National Forest. I have much less experience than Kevin. I've worked for the Forest Service for about 12 years. I've been in Region 5 in California as a line officer for 5 years. And so I started, just got thrown right into the mix. I had an academic background kind of with fire prior to coming to California. And I had spent a little bit of time with crews on the ground in prescribed fire and a couple of really small incidents. But I started my path to agency administrator here on the Sierra National Forest, and I'm currently a journey level agency administrator.
Wonderful. All right, Nikki.
Good morning. My name is Nikki Johnny, and I am an assistant forest FMO on the El Dorado National Forest. I have 27 years of fire experience, and I've done details as a ranger, North Ops, Chief 1 on the El Dorado, and I have also been a trainee as an agency administrator. Currently, I'm a Type 1 IC trainee on Team 2.
Okay, and then Tammy, would you mind introducing yourself?
So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Tammy Randall Parker. I serve as the Forest Supervisor on the Inyo National Forest. Prior to that, I worked as a district ranger for 17 years in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, and have been playing the agency administrator duties since 2002. I also serve on an incident management team. I serve on the Type 1 Rocky Mountain team out of Colorado, and I'm the liaison officer. And a lot of my background with working as an AA has been managing fires for resource benefit. Thanks for having me, Al.
You're welcome. Okay, so that is our panel discussion, and we're going to go ahead and jump into this. Remember that the rationale behind this is so that we can make a successful fire season for our agency administrators. It can be a very complex time to be in. And so the hope is that you'll be able to glean some tips and tricks from the folks that we have on the panel. So we have a couple of prepared questions. So the first one that I'm going to have is, what tips would you give for a new agency administrator in preparing for a fire on your unit? So we'll go ahead and start with Sarah LaPlante on this one.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to approach this as though, I have a couple of years under my belt as an agency administrator, but I remember very distinctly being brand new to fire. And I'm assuming a lot of people who are listening to this are looking for some of those early day tips. So I think some of the tips I have, the first one is get to know your staff. Be really comfortable with whom they are, what their roles are, your fire staff in particular, and be transparent with them about what you know and what you don't know. That's been kind of a really good secret to my success, is just being fully transparent with if they start talking about something, a tactic, a strategy, fire lingo that I just don't know what they're talking about. I just ask. I'm not embarrassed. My job here is to help manage this incident, manage this fire, work with them, and I can't take advantage of their expertise if I don't know what they're talking about. So I am first and foremost just fully transparent with what I know and what I don't know. Another tip would be when you start, before your season starts, have some familiarity with your landscape. You want to know where on your landscape you have an opportunity to manage fire, where you have maybe when you hear that there's a start in a place where you should be more concerned, so that you just have some general understanding about risk across your landscape. You're going to talk to your fuels or fire staff anytime there is a start, but you want to have that familiarity. It just helps a lot, so that, when, I know that that's an area of high bug kill, there's a lot of homes nearby, then that's just something that you want to maybe respond a little bit differently to as a line officer or as an agency administrator. And the last tip I guess I have is, particularly if you're new, but even if you're not new, be very comfortable asking for help. It's, in Region 5 anyway, we have, during the thick of fire season, there's these daily agency administrator calls. I'm sorry, you probably hear my son in the background. Apologies. But just so what the focus of those calls are is partially to take the temperature of everybody who currently has incidents, to know whether they need help. And there's just this really strong support system. So if you either are in a campaign fire and are feeling exhausted and just need some backup, or if you're just starting to feel like you're pushing the boundaries of where your comfort level is managing that particular incident, ask for help. And people really want to reach out and make sure that you have a successful incident. So those are my initial tips. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Tammy, what would you share with people?
All right, and those were great ones, Sarah. I had some of those on my list too. The other thing that I would strongly recommend is, as a line officer, that you attend as many as you can the fire refreshers that we have. The purpose of that is to provide clear leaders' intent and expectations prior to going into the fire season. Also, remember to prepare all your delegations for your type 3, 4, and 5 ICs. That's really important. And I always like to schedule a meeting just with my fire staff, specifically the ICs, again, talking about clear expectations from you going into the fire season. And then something in more recent years, because we are allowing fire to play its natural role on the landscape, scheduling meetings and taking time to meet with your partners, stakeholders, board of supervisors, your BLM, Park Service. A lot of our boundaries are adjacent, and we all need to be on the same page with where we are in managing fires for resource benefit. So talking to the partners about those types of things. Also, You know, this year is particularly interesting with COVID-19 going on. We've already been having conversations with our elected officials and partners about fire restrictions and going into fire restrictions earlier, maybe than usual, just to reduce the number of fires. But it's just those relationships with your personnel, all your partners and stakeholders prior to fire season are really key to success in managing fire.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll turn it over to Kevin Elliott next.
All right, well, thank you. So one, and Al's got on the screen for you, there's this agency administrator toolbox, and I would encourage you this question is about preparation. So this is before the bell has even rung. And so take advantage of the time that you've got right now. It's precious. And it's gonna serve you extremely well when that bell rings, and it will ring. And it's not going to be when you want it to ring. It's just going to happen. And so the more you can do to prepare, the better. And so that toolkit that Al's got on the screen there, it's good now to just start perusing through it. There's a lot in there. Don't let it overwhelm or intimidate you, but do, on occasion, go in there and take a look at it. It's well worth taking a perusal and working through that. So just wanted to point out what Al's got on the screen. And it's already been mentioned, but don't be afraid to ask for help. And that sounds simplistic, and yet, depending on our personalities and et cetera, sometimes that can be hard to do. So my encouragement is don't be afraid to ask for help. And given that we've, quote, got time, or we need to make time, don't feel afraid in raising your hand to go shadow someone else. So maybe your neighbor or your neighbor's neighbor has an incident. Raise your hand to go shadow them. Also, don't be afraid that when it's your turn in the saddle, don't be afraid to ask for help and have someone else, a more senior, quote, agency administrator, not take over for you, but simply come alongside you and help coach you on your incident. So don't be afraid to shadow someone else, and don't be afraid to ask for coaching help when it's your turn. And then there's another tool, and I imagine it might get talked about in the second session with Jason Kuiken, but I just want to reemphasize, there's another tool out there that I would begin to become familiar with, and that's called the Risk Management Assistance Toolkit. And things are going to go south sometimes quick. In other words, you're going to have a start that we just simply aren't able to catch. And it's going to go big and it's going to go fast. And so there's something called the Risk Management Assistance Toolkit that has a number of products that you can order early on. Things like a suppression difficulty index, the potential control location index, snag hazards, and ground evacuations. Those are some things that are going to be really particular if indeed something begins to stand up and make a run at 2 PM on you. And so I just wanted to point that tool out there as well. And then Sarah hit it right on the head. Know your ground. And again, that sounds simplistic and so bloody obvious, but yet it is so important. Understand what your values at risk are even now, because when that bell rings, it's going to be snap, snap, snap time. And so trying to figure that out then, obviously, if that's your situation, you'll have to do it. But if you can begin to have a keener understanding of your landscape, not just physically, but your political and social landscape, start building those relationships now. Identify who are your primetime players, internally and externally. Make sure that you court the keenest relationship you can with your FMO. The two of you are going to be hooked at the hip. You have got to have a very keen, trusting working relationship with each other. Know your other prime time players in the public, whether that's your county board of supervisors, your congressional staffers, etc. And so again, I guess the summary would be, what's the common thread through all of that? It's about trust and building relationships. It's those very things that we learned in kindergarten in terms of trying to play well in the sandbox together. The same things come right back here. With that, thank you, Al.
You're welcome. Thank you, Kevin. All right, so we'll turn it over then to Nikki from an IMT perspective.
Okay. I agree. You definitely want to know who your cooperators, stakeholders are, because you don't want to be an afterthought. You want to be invited to the table from the very beginning. And those are your peers. And so it's always important when I walk into a situation that hopefully those relationships are already built and I'm not the one building them for the forest. I want to maintain them and make them better, but I need them to be in place. And it helps if you guys have a good transition package. I know on my forest, we do an exercise called the emerging fire exercise, and it comes to knowing your land and kind of identifying what's your biggest risk on your forest, where's your next big fire, and kind of practicing and going through drills with your team, your internal team, and practicing before fire season starts. Building, I call it a team thumb drive of everything that team needs to know, with updated phone numbers, contact information, forest maps, aviation plans, medical plans, everything that should be updated for that fire season, so that you're not building it the night before that team arrives. You already have it in place, and basically you're just kind of fine tuning your delegation letter and your letter of intent and those kinds of things. And you have time to sit down and talk to the IC and go through some of your concerns and where, you know, what kind of strategy you have for the fire, and how you want to interact, and what time of the day, and you know, what's important to you, what are things you need to know right away, and things that can wait till the morning or the evening when you come back to perhaps fire camp. So from an incident commander perspective, just be prepared and know who your team is. You should have an internal team, like hand in hand with your FMO. Realize sometimes your FMO may not be there. They may be on a team assignment, so you may have to dip down a little farther to Chief 2 or Chief 3. But have that relationship already intact. Know who your lead read is. Have an IDA already ordered. You know, a buying team. All those things already in place. So when the IC and the team gets there, they can kind of have a smoother transition. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all. Okay, and just as a reminder that the chat option is available if you have any questions. So let's go ahead and move to our next question. So we're going to transition from the beginning of fire season to actually now you have an incident on your unit. So the next question is what are the top 3 things to remember when you have a new start on your district? And so a lot of them we've already heard about, but let's see if we can expand on that to the top 3 things from your perspective. So let's start with Tammy on this one.
All right. So top 3, and we've been all meant talking about this, but having that really good relationship with your FMO and your fire staff is key at this point. And so immediately, you know, you want to start communicating with them about what the fire's doing, what the potential might be, getting a size up from them, including, you know, what kind of weather is forecasted, so that you're all thinking about, you know, what might happen throughout the rest of the day, whether you're going to catch it or you might be thinking about, are we going to have to order a team for this one? So just that communication and talking about what the fire's doing and what its potential could be. Again, depending on the situation, you've heard it from a couple folks already. This is the time to get help. This is the time to pull in other staff, maybe some other rangers from your forest or from another forest to think about helping you if you think that your fire might really take off. So always get help. And Kevin brought it up, and that what's up on the screen with the agency administrator resources. You know, I always bring those things up at the time of the start, just to make sure that I'm working through those checklists and I'm not missing anything. Yeah, really good communication, and you've got to be there and be present and engaged from the moment that you get the call that you've got the new start. I'll let someone else take it from there.
Sounds good. So I have you up next, Kevin, to answer this question. And there was a couple of questions also in the chat. So yours is going to be three-part question. Is what are your top three things that when you have an agency administrator has a fire on their unit? And then can you explain a little bit the differences as you see it between the IC and the agency administrator and the forest FMO and the agency administrator?
Indeed, I can. So top three things. Well, I'll go in reverse. I'll do the role thing, the differentiation, and there is a distinction, and I think it's important. It's important to understand each other's lanes, if you will, and roles. That way, we're just not stepping on top of each other, and that's the agency administrator, who is the line officer. It's your forest. You have delegated the job of suppressing this fire to an incident management team who's headed up by an incident commander. You're still the agency administrator. You're still the forest supervisor, but you've asked Nikki to take care of this incident for you. I always say be visible, but stay out of the way. Let Nikki do her job. Well, what about the FMO? Well, the forest FMO is still the forest FMO. And remember earlier, I talked about that the agency administrator and their respective FMO, they're hooked at the hip. They indeed need to be. And so, yes, the FMO is still going to provide operational informational context, etc., to both the IC and the agency administrator. So again, there are clear lanes, if you want, if that's, I don't know if that's the right vernacular, but indeed there is a distinction. And I'm fortunate in that the time that I spent most recently, well, certainly where I'm at on the Los Padres, I am blessed in having now he may tell you something different, but I think I and Jimmy Harris are at Forest FML. We have a really good working relationship. When I was on the Sequoia, Brent Skaggs and I had a wonderful working relationship. We were hooked at the hip. I depended on him. And so again, I trust that helps parse that out, and others can help articulate it if necessary. But then those three things, so you're going to hear some common themes here. One is communicate. Practice the no surprises rule. When that bell rings, use those relationships that you've built and start running that communication trap line. Remember, you've already prepared, and Nikki talked about having that little thumb drive. Pull that thing out. Or what's another metaphor? In case of emergency, break the glass. And so break that glass, pull that kit out there, out of that box, and begin to communicate up, down, and all around. And I'll come to that here in another sec. The second thing would be, I'll put it under the guise of situational awareness. And that's just simply make sure that you're talking to the district ranger, the FMO, the initial IC, that type 3, 4, 5, whatever, whoever's on scene, begin to get a size up. Understand how they're working their way through the complexity analysis. Make sure that they actually are working their way through a complexity analysis. An understanding of values at risk. What are the available resources? Oh, is this actually in the wilderness or not? Yes, there is a difference between how we operate within wilderness and not wilderness. Have those conversations, because it just might be that your predecessor had a different view. So understand that. Understand your forest plan. Understand where those retardant avoidance areas are. So I put that all under situational awareness. Thirdly is I'll go back to, don't be afraid to ask for help. And especially, heaven forbid, if you end up being the first one in the region to get a fire, Lord help you. I can guarantee you, you're going to get all kinds of help, whether you want it or not. Because you're the only fish in the fishbowl. You're the only thing, you're the only game in town. Now, the advantage of that is you're going to get all the resources you need. There's no competition. You're the first one out of the chute. So you get whatever you want. The challenge is everybody else has just been waiting for that fire bell to ring. They don't have anything else to do but to get into your business. And I guarantee you, they will. You will have folks calling you. Well, I'm starting to go off on a rant. You will get help. And so be able to practice managing your way through all that help. And some of it indeed you will want to have, and then some of it you'll just simply need to manage and say politely, we got this. I return the balance of my time.
All right, thank you for that, Kevin. Appreciate it. And so I do see the questions. I'm going to go ahead and go to Nikki first. So from your perspective, Nikki, top 3 things for a new agency administrator on their unit. What do you have?
Okay, some of them have already been said, but I just kind of want to bring in the COVID-19 perspective this year because, like Kevin said, God forbid if you're the first team out and it's all about COVID-19 hijacking your fire, you know, and trying to prioritize things. And so that's kind of the big concern this year. And I just want people to realize that firefighter safety, personnel safety is number one, putting the fire out. And then, you know, COVID-19 is a secondary thing that we are trying to mitigate and deal with. But for me, the top 3 things to a new start is, how do you support your fire? Are you prioritizing that fire over other project work, and where is it at? And how can you help by providing militia folks to support that fire organization? Start thinking about logistics. If you want to help with firefighter safety, logistics is probably one of your top priorities, because we've got to think about how can we bed them down safely, get adequate rest, feeding, you know, are their vehicles safe to drive? All those logistical things, communications, it all comes down to logistics. And a lot of times people have to order a team because of the logistical issue. They have everything else in place, but they just can't logistically support the firefighters. So start trying to think that and strategize that out with your FMO if you have an emerging fire. I think those are my top 3 things. You know, support your IC, work with your type 3 IC, and know who they are. Just don't talk to them in meetings, but actually go out and have that FaceTime prior to the fire. So you've already built that trust and rapport with them and can have a good conversation when it comes to doing that complexity analysis and strategizing 2, 3, 4 days out. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So what I'm going to do now is let's go ahead. We'll go with Tammy for her top 3. And then I want to go ahead and jump into some of these questions. We have about 4 questions in the chat box that we'll take a look at. So Tammy, what is your top 3 things? Oh, no, actually it would be Sarah. I'm sorry.
Sarah,
Sarah.
thank
Yep,
you.
I'm going to go to Sarah. Sarah, what is your top 3 things?
Okay, so they've been covered a little bit, but the first one was what I think a couple people talked about, which is really knowing having some pre-planning, whether it's in the wilderness, really knowing what are the strategies you're going to employ to go after this start. Is it something that's full suppression, put it out because of where it is, or do you have an opportunity to manage for resource benefits? That's one. The second one also talked about communication. Know who you're going to call internally, know who you're going to call externally. That was something that a lesson hard learned is just, I've had a lot of starts when I'm sitting at home and thinking, oh man, who is the grazing permittee in that area? And so I now have a map of that on my wall at home. Just knowing who you're going to call to give those notifications so that there are no surprises and that people are going to be aware. And then the last one is something that wasn't mentioned, and it might be obvious to a lot of more experienced agency administrators or line officers, but you should know, if you're new to this whole fire thing, that the vast majority of starts are caught in initial attack. And there's you're not going, delegation letters, calling a team in. So just know that. I remember my very first fire bell as a deputy ranger, I was like roaring to go and like, what are we going to do? And my very experienced ranger just reminded me that we have a staff that are putting it out right now. It was a tiny little campfire, So just have some perspective. And so just take a deep breath and take each start for what it is and respond appropriately. That's what I got.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. So let's go to a couple of questions. The first one is from Jeremy Dorsey on the Sequoia, and it is, as we approach this upcoming fire season, what are some of the biggest concerns, watch out situations that an agency administrator should have on the radar in regard to our current COVID-19 approach into the mission? So for this one, I'm going to go to Tammy. If you could take a stab at that one.
Wow, thanks, Al. This is really hard because, none of us have slides for what firefighting is going to look like in the time of COVID. I've been wearing another hat for the region for the past, I think 5 weeks now as the safety officer. And so believe me, we're talking a lot about what's going to be different during the time of COVID and how to keep our folks safe, right? And so everything really does go back to all the basics that you've been hearing about. And that is, we've got to do all we can to make sure that we're talking about social distancing, hygiene, those types of things to keep our firefighters safe. There's a lot going on at the Washington office level with national incident management organizations, also with the area command teams. And they've been talking specific at that level about, how our fire camp's going to look this year. And we're talking about having a lot of what we would normally do in fire camps be done virtually. I think just going back to thinking about folks on this call and what at least we've been trying to talk about here on the Inyo National Forest with our fire personnel and Taro. I have a great FMO. We've been given this a lot of thought, but maybe we need to think differently about how we roll out initially on fires. Some of us have like standard staffing that we do. But Taro and all of our chiefs are, trying to follow the weather more closely each day to see, how many people we expose, because we've already, some of us and some of you on the call probably know, it's only taken one person that might be sick a day after they've gone to a fire or been with their engine crew, that and one person might result in 39 people not being able to come to work the next day. And so staffing is a huge issue. And so we've all got to put our minds around this to think about not being mindful not to lose a whole bunch of firefighters at once. Yeah, I know it just happened on your forest, and it's happened on others. So, I think our message every day has been to everyone, social distancing, thinking about hygiene, and this whole, firefighters are into honor, integrity, trust, respect. And what people are doing on their off hours can have a really big effect on an entire crew. So, in just fulfilling our integrity to one another is talking to people about what they're doing on their off time. And I know that's kind of going to a touchy place and it's hard, but we've got to, all of us do. But again, we don't have slides for this. And I think one thing I would absolutely ask all of you to look at is we've had 3 or 4 fires now in the country where there are FLAs that have come out, and you should look those over because people are learning a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And for an example, we've talked about the number of vehicles we take to a fire because we want the social distancing and not to put as many people in a truck. Well, there's been situations where there was so many vehicles there, that imposed a safety hazard. And I think someone said the other day that I really struck with me is the other thing about COVID is we can't get ourselves completely bogged down in COVID and thinking about only COVID, because fire before COVID is the most one of the most risky things we do. It kills more people every year in our agency than anything else. And we got to stay focused on the basics. We got to go back and make sure that we're paying attention to all of the hazards that come with fighting fire, not putting people in places where there's a whole bunch of snags, not going to fires when we can't catch them. There's days when we can only show up and anchor. And so all those things need to stay true. And we have to keep focused on all the protocols that we have for fire. And I'll stop there and maybe someone else has a bit to share.
Yeah, do any of the other panel members want to jump in on this question?
I can. So we did get the Wildland Fire Response Plan, which is a best management practice done by the Area Command Team 3, and it should be finalized if it's not already. And I know that the IC group is gearing up to start working on standard operating guidelines, especially within the logistics sections. And so that there could be, the plan is to have some consistency throughout California's IMTs, so that when people go to a fire, it's not different with each team within California. And so we are working on that, and hopefully we'll have something to come soon.
Okay, thanks for that, Nikki. All right, so I have another question then for you. This one from Chris Carlton. Can you talk a little bit about the how, as an AA, you weigh local team recommendations against regional context or activity? Kevin, would you mind taking that one?
Sure. And again, that's going to impinge or be dependent upon those relationships that you've built with the regional office. Because again, remember, everybody's going to be wanting to help you. And indeed, just like anything else, you may have different perspectives. And so you need to monitor, as the agency administrator, I would say my bias is that I'm going to still defer to Nikki or whoever the IC is, and let them sort that out, because they're initially, and for the most part, I'm going to rely upon the IC to help sort those different perspectives out, because I know, partly because I know Nikki and I know other type 1 and type 2 ICs, they've got those communication trap lines built. And so I know they're having those conversations. And so I'm just going to simply keep my ear to the rail, if you will. Again, being visible, but out of the way, but monitoring, making sure that indeed, if indeed there's a place or a spot for me to help step in and facilitate that conversation, or from an agency administrator perspective, if I need to help guide that in a certain direction, then I can do that. But otherwise, I'm gonna step back. I'm never gonna let anybody run off a cliff. But I'm gonna step back and allow the ICs to do their job. So if that was sufficiently evasive, I'm good.
All right, thank you, Kevin. One other question from Chris Christopherson. So specifically to Tammy and also Kevin, can you speak to the AA versus A rep roles and how district rangers can be successful? So since I've got you on the camera, why don't you go first, Kevin, and then Tammy, if you have anything to weigh in on.
So, as much as I love my job, I don't do it 24/7. I too get tired. I too need help. I too am grooming, because not only is it about managing this incident, as an AA, i.e. a line officer, I'm also looking for opportunities to help provide leadership development in my employees, and that includes the district rangers. So indeed, I'm going to utilize the district rangers as agency administrator representatives. They're not the agency administrator. They're representing the agency administrator. But I indeed am going to call upon them and have the confidence in my district rangers, whether it's here, wherever I've been. I've always been able to build that same kind of trusting relationship, just like I do with the FMOs. And so I'm going to rely upon the AA rep to step in for me when I need a break, or to simply, I just want some time to sit and jaw about something, or have a conversation. Let's think through this issue that's popped up that Nikki has presented us, or as we ran our communication trap line, the congressional staffer presented to us. And so again, there's a different lane, but the district rangers, or whoever your agency rep is, they are a key part of this being of successfully managing this incident. End of report.
Okay,
So
thank you.
I agree with, oh, I'm sorry, Al.
Nope.
I agree with everything that Kevin said, and Al is the expert on Chapter 5 in the Red Book. But and last year was kind of a slow fire year for us, in California and around the country. And if you didn't read Chapter 5 of the Red Book last year, I recommend you do, because there were some significant changes. Prior to last year, forest supervisors were responsible for all type 2 and 1 fires, as I recall. But that changed last year, and now the district rangers are actually agency administrators if they have the qualifications. So if you're an advanced agency administrator and you have a type 1 incident, you can serve as the agency administrator on that fire. So I wanted that made me think about that change. And Al, if I got that wrong, you correct me. But I agree with everything Kevin said. Fires can go on for a long time. Last year on Inyo, we had one go on for almost a couple months. and the district ranger and myself at different times absolutely needed people to come in and help us so we could take a break because we all get tired.
Great, wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay, and then I have a question from Frank, and I'm going to ask you, Nikki, if you could weigh in on this. So regarding about COVID and how it adds a whole other layer of logistical complexities, and so many expect an increase in logistics, putting a type 2 or actually from a type 3 to a type 2. Has the regional FAM staff discussed the possible increase in demand for IMTs?
They have, probably not to the extent that you would like them to. I think CWCG, the coordinating group that oversees the teams, has talked about it. We did have an IMT workshop, virtual workshop for a day, and we did discuss that. And like I said, that's why the IACs are trying to work on those SOGs. But the concern that a lot of us have is a lot of our cooperators, local government, are on EOCs for their counties. They're not as available as they have been in the past. And so I know that my team, the first last role that we had to turn it down because we couldn't staff the C&G appropriately. And so we're going to have those kinds of concerns. It's not just, oh, we're going to have more fires or more teams ordered because of COVID-19, but a lot of us are strapped for individuals that fill key positions. So I'm hoping that forests aren't just going to, push the button because they're concerned about COVID-19 on a type 3 incident. And we need to be really careful because there is probably the fire danger has increased this year. Looking at the forecast and stuff, Northern California looks like they could start probably a potential fire season beginning in July. There's been a lot of rain and grass growing in Southern California. So fire season is going to look a lot different than it did last year. And we just need to be careful with how we order resources.
Okay, thank you for that. So we have about a little over 10 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about WFDS and the whole decision-making process that document entails and how we transfer information about the decision to the team. And so let's talk a little bit about WFDS and tips and tricks. So let's start with this one. I'm going to go back to you again, Nikki, is when you show up to an incident as a team, what are you looking for from that line officer, that agency administrator or agency rep when it comes to WFDS? Okay, so the one thing I start looking for is your objectives, your management objectives, and your leader's intent. That's where I'm hoping you put the most thoughtful, relevant messaging in there for me, because I'm going to look at that, and that's going to go in the IAP, and that's going to be my talking points for the incident, as well as the talking points that we discussed one-on-one together with the AA and myself. But that's what I look for in WFDS. That's my written direction. And so I understand that first WFDS might not be as complete, but if you could really work on that leader's intent and those objectives and some strategy, that really helps get me started when I first get there. And then those things can be refined later on. But I understand that first night is a late night and people are trying to get all of those checklists completed, but thoughtful, relevant messaging. Thanks. All right, thank you, Nikki. So we'll go to Sarah, same question.
Okay, so for WFDS, I would say as a district ranger or an agency administrator, most important tip is have a staff member really well trained in how to work WFDS and how to populate it, and and have a backup too. It's not always the most intuitive tool to populate, and so you want to have some familiarity with it, and you want to have somebody who can help you keep it updated if you're the agency administrator. So have some staff trained and have a network of people that you can reach out to on that. Also, I mean, we talked about leaders' intent and those objectives being the most important. So absolutely. And I want to also stress, like, as the incident goes on, and once you kind of have developed that WFDS document, I've had some staff who really wanted to make that that tool like a novel and just, put so much information every day, pages and pages. And so I had to really make sure people understood it's a decision support tool. It helps you guide decisions. It helps you rationalize and document, but it's not necessarily, it does not have to be a novel. So just keep that in mind. I've used bullet points when you're updating on a regular basis. Just make sure you're using it as a tool and it's not a tool that's becoming all-encompassing for you as the agency administrator.
Great, thank you for that. So Tammy, thoughts about WFDS?
Agreed with everything that was just said. Just something, a tip to think about, practice. This is another thing that you can do before you go into the fire season. Last year I had all of my district rangers run a mock fire, pull together all their staff and prepare a WFDS prior to the fire season. And that tool is cumbersome. I've been around a long time. I sometimes just wish for the old paper copies that we used to work with, because you can get bogged down in which buttons to push. And that can take a lot of time away from actually providing the meat of what needs to be in there. And that is the good leader's intent and figuring out some of the objectives that you have for your fire and looking at especially the risk. I think that's the best part of that, the WFDS document is the piece around risk management. But practice and make sure district rangers that you're practicing with your staff.
Perfect, thank you. And then Kevin, any thoughts about WFDS from your perspective?
Yeah, one real quick thing that, again, sounds real simplistic, but yet if you don't do it, when the bell rings, you're scrambling. Make sure indeed that you even have a WFDS profile, and that those reminders about changing the WFDS password every now and then, don't ignore them, because as soon as you ignore that and as soon as it lapses, the fire bell is going to ring 10 minutes later. So just keep your WFDS profile up to date, practice, just like Tammy said, and then make sure, and I'll reiterate the point that Nikki made. That first one, while it may not be perfect, one of the best gifts that you can provide an incoming IC is the first WFDS run. Matter of fact, if you can have that to them as they're coming to the incident, you will score so many points and it'll be so advantageous to them, just like Nikki mentioned. Then the next tip is make sure you keep it up to date, that you keep it accurate, and that it synchronizes with the daily, twice, depending on the incident, twice a day, the 209. Because this just in, when that bell starts ringing, when you're the only bell, not a problem. You get all the toys, all the resources you want. There's no competition for resources. But when that bell starts ringing all the way up and down throughout the GAC, and then both GACs are going, now you're competing for resources. And so your WFDS needs to provide the rationale and basis that's going to be in the 209, that's going in the morning and the evening to compete for those valuable resources. And so make sure that WFDS indeed is being able to demonstrate why you need that last type 1 hotshot crew versus someone else. And I'll just frame it that way. You indeed are competing for resources when multiple bells are ringing at the same time. And in response time, I'll stop there, Al. Thank you.
So since I have you, Kevin, you did mention about the 209. Can you briefly explain what the 209 is for new agency administrators?
So in essence, it's a size up, and it's a daily sit report, if you want to characterize it that way, that provides a size up for the incident. what resources, in particular where folks are looking for, there's a justification about what you're needing. And so there's a part of that report that says, what are your critical needs? Well, I need 10 hotshot crews. I need 20 engines. I need 3 more line EMTs, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things that go into that 209. There's a lot of things in that. But my point with the WFDS is that your WFDS, the rationale and everything in your WFDS better synchronize with what you're characterizing as being your needs in the 209. And then the other particular thing, Al, is that, hey, this just in, or guess what? When you publish that WFDS, everybody in the world can read it. And everybody in the world does read it. So make sure that you're doing it accurately. Make sure that it's synchronized, because everybody's looking at it.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Okay, everybody, our time is about up. I just want to let you know that this is part 1. We will have part 2 that'll be coming up later in today in a couple of hours. That'll be more specific to more complex situations that an agency representative will be able to, will be faced with. And so a similar format, a question and answer with 4 new panel members that will have a discussion with you all. So I want to thank you all for joining us with this. I want to especially thank the panel discussion. Thank you, panel, for being available and sharing your knowledge that you've learned over many, many years. So appreciate that. And then lastly, I want to thank Ashley Whalen. She helped us out in the background with tech support. So all these things that go on in the background don't happen by accident. Thank you, Ashley, for that. All right, all. Well, we will catch you on the next one. If you can join us, these will be recorded. So if by any chance you want to view it later, they will be available. Thank you all.
Thanks, Al.